We will continue reading some stories of Jesus over the next few weeks. We had been following along and listening to Jesus through the Gospel of Luke, and today we will be doing so through the Gospel of Matthew for the next few weeks. Today we will jump right into the middle of Jesus' ministry. So all the things that he's known for, healings, preachings, big crowds, pushback from religious leaders, it's all in full swing by now. And as we'll see over the next few weeks in these Matthew readings, one of the big ways that Jesus loved to teach people was through parables. Now, parables were a common teaching tool in the ancient world that were used by many philosophers, rabbis, other people in the Bible used parables as well. They were stories, but stories with a message that convey deep truths about God or humanity or how God works or how humanity works for better and for worse. Jesus used parables to challenge his listeners then, and they will still challenge us today because they were often surprising, out of the ordinary, convicting, because Jesus' parables were intended to wake people up to the amazing new things that God was doing through him, which often meant turning people's priorities, roles, expectations upside down. Jesus always had a true and deep understanding of the human condition, and we see that in our parable today. So let's read from the Gospel according to Matthew, chapter 13, verses 1 through 9 and 18 through 23. Hear now the word of the Lord. That same day, Jesus went out of the house and sat by the lake. Such large crowds gathered around him that he got into a boat and sat in it, while all the people stood on the shore. Then he told them many things in parables, saying, "A farmer went out to sow his seed. As he was scattering the seed, some fell along the path, and the birds came and ate it up. Some fell on rocky places, where it did not have much soil. It sprang up quickly because the soil was shallow. But when the sun came up, the plants were scorched, and they withered because they had no root. Other seed fell among thorns, which grew up and choked the plants. Still other seed fell on good soil, where it produced a crop, 100, 60, or 30 times what was sown. Whoever has ears, let them hear." Listen then to what the parable of the sower means. When anyone hears the message about the kingdom and does not understand it, the evil one comes and snatches away what was sown in their heart. This is the seed sown along the path. The seed falling on rocky ground refers to someone who hears the word and at once receives it with joy. But since they have no root, they last only a short time. When trouble or persecution comes because of the word, they quickly fall away. The seed falling among the thorns refers to someone who hears the word, but the worries of this life and the deceitfulness of wealth choke the word, making it unfruitful. But the seed falling on good soil refers to someone who hears the word and understands it. This is the one who produces a crop yielding 100, 60, or 30 times what was sown. May God bless the reading of this holy word today. So Jesus is speaking to a big crowd of people on the shore of the Sea of Galilee here. And as you heard, he gets in a boat so that he's not too crowded as he talks. And he tells them a number of parables there, which we will read over the next few weeks. And it's funny in this chapter how Jesus will tell a parable and then he will say something else, and then he will turn aside to his disciples and only explain to them what that earlier parable meant. That's why our verses today that I read were separated into two chunks, so we can connect the parable Jesus told with the explanation that he gave a few minutes later. The break in the middle of those two chunks occurs because after Jesus tells this parable of the sower, his disciples lean over to him in verse 10 and say, "Hey, Jesus, what's up with all these parables?" And he says that he doesn't want to give people all the answers in life. He wants people to do the hard work of thinking about faith. Not just be told what to believe with short sound bites and easy answers. He wants people to listen, to pay attention, to think about it, and spend time figuring out what it means for their lives. Hence the parables. However, he does make an exception for the disciples, because he does explain some of the background meaning answers to them, probably because they will be the teachers who will lead the church after he is gone. So he wants to make sure that they've got it right. The parables, the stories, are for the public, for anyone to hear and then think about and mull over and pray about and meditate what it means. But the explanation is private, just for the disciples, the leaders. That little explanation that I read, that second chunk of verses, is like the teacher's guide for this parable lesson today. Jesus gives them the answer key so they can know what everything is supposed to mean for when they share the story with others later. Fortunately for us, we can read Jesus' explanation, and we have had time to think about it. So we know that the parable of the sower is about how different people can respond to God's message. The sower is God, or at this time, it is Jesus. And the seeds are the good news, the gospel of God's amazing grace that can transform people's lives. Some soil and some people are more receptive in different ways than others. The sower and the seeds are the same, but the soil changes, so there are different results. Nevertheless, the sower keeps working because that's his mission. He doesn't give up, and neither should we. We have the amazing work to join the Creator, the planter of the universe, who's planting seeds everywhere. So why wouldn't we want to help out and make a difference for eternity? Well, maybe because not all the work pays off. Some of the work, like some of the seeds, aren't well received, and they don't grow at all. But some do grow and take root and thrive. What's so true about this parable is that, again, you can really see how Jesus understands people in all their different ways, all the ways that they react. I guess he's been preaching long enough to see the whole gamut of what people do when they hear his message. And this simple parable illustrates those differences perfectly. So what are the four different types of soil, the four different kinds of responses that this parable describes? Well, the first one that he mentioned was soil that's a path. A path is for walking, not for growing stuff. If you try to plant something on a path where people are walking all the time, then nothing's going to come up, and the birds can just swoop down and pick up the seeds. It reminds me of when I was in college. We had a grassy quad in the middle of campus. And the way the campus was laid out, it just so happens that a lot of us students would come from this corner when we were leaving some classes and would need to go in the building on the opposite corner for our next classes, and being the lazy students that we were, we just walked on the grass from one corner of the quad to the next, the shortest distance between 2 points. For a lazy college student who only got 3 hours of sleep is a straight line. And so we would just walk on the perfectly manicured grass, and week after week, day after day, all through the school year, all that grass would get trampled down. And eventually by the end of the year, it was just a sod path, because nothing can grow when people are trampling on it. But it was always funny. We would come back after summer break, and the groundskeeping crew had been hard at work trying to get their lovely grass to grow back where we had ruined it. So they had planted seeds, and the grass had started growing a little bit, and they put some cordons, like signs, that said, "Keep off the grass, you stinking students, ruining the yard." And so we would have to take the long way around, and we would grumble. And after a few weeks, the grass would get a little taller, so they would take down the signs, which meant, of course, very next day, the students would just trample. And by the end of the year, nothing was growing. I came back a few years after I graduated to see the place, and it looked like the groundskeeping team admitted defeat and just went ahead and decided there's no way anything's going to grow right there. So we might as well make it an official path, manicure it, make it look nice, and not have to try and wrestle with all the feet that are trampling on it, because nothing will grow on a path. So, like in the parable, Jesus said, when seed is thrown on a path, it's not going to sink into the ground. It's like people who hear God's message tossed to them, presented to them, shown to them, but they don't let it seep in. They don't get it. They don't understand. They're not interested. You could say they are going their own way on their path, and they are determined to keep going that way. So the seeds of God's love that are shown to them, they don't stay. They don't take root. They might get snatched up or trampled down or just bounce off. The birds of pride or spite or temptation, anger, could be any number of things that prevent the seeds of God's love from seeping down. It would be like a person who's not just resistant or grumpy, but they are determined to be in a bad mood. Like they have decided to be upset, and nothing will convince them otherwise. No matter how much kindness you show to them, "Oh, it's so good to see you. What can I do for you? Here you go." They are still grumpy. You can't make any progress. No matter how many smiles that you give, they still insist on frowning. They don't let anything pierce the hard, worn, trampled shell of their soul. So seeds of goodness will just bounce right off. But that means that you don't have to take it personally. If you bend over backwards to be kind and a grumpy person is still grumpy, it's not about you. It's about them. Some soil, some people are just like that. But you keep showing love. You keep tossing out good seeds when you pass by. And maybe over time, their soil, their soul, will get a little less hardened. Or maybe not. We don't know. All we can do, all we're supposed to do, is keep showing love. And it's up to them to receive it. The next type of soil is soil with rocks underneath. There's a little bit of dirt there at the top, so when the seed gets planted, the plant comes up quick, but the soil is so shallow that when the sun comes out, there's no roots deep down, the plant just withers and dies and doesn't come back. Jesus says that's like people who are glad to hear about God. They get excited, pumped up, they're super passionate. God is awesome, oh yeah. But when trouble comes and questions are raised, they can't take it. They wither because their faith is shallow. They'll be easily defeated or confused. I thought this was supposed to be easy. I thought God would give me whatever I prayed for, right? Some people are misled about what life and faith are like. They might have been presented with a gospel of only prosperity. But anyone who promises that having faith means your life will always be easy or you will always get whatever you want is lying. Some days are just plain hard, and you get worn out. It happens. That's why roots are important. It's great to get pumped up and excited, but be sure that you grow deeper while you are growing taller. That way, if you get knocked down, then you get up again, because your faith is rooted deep in the eternal Spirit of God. The next type of soil is soil with thorns. The seed gets planted, starts to grow, it's coming up well, looking good, but there are thorns around it that grow too, and they choke the plant. Jesus says that's like people who hear and feel God's love, want to grow in it, but then worries or temptations or distractions in life stifle them, keep them from growing strong and healthy. And that can happen to any of us, even if it's just for a season. If there's something big going on in your life, maybe it's a really important work project that's looming large, a family health crisis, something really bad or just really challenging. It kind of takes up all the space in your brain because you're thinking about it all the time. You're worried about it. It's just bearing down on you and you can't think about anything else. You don't feel good. So you're definitely not going to feel good enough or have time enough to say, I think I'll just go for a leisurely walk today out in God's creation and meditate on my bountiful blessings. You're not going to be able to do that when life is just choking you. You're going to say, oh my gosh, I can't take it anymore. I think I'm going to lose it, but I can't stop. I've got to take care of these things. It happens. One of the other examples Jesus gives for that kind of soil is the deceitfulness of wealth. When you think that working and earning money should be your top priority in life, so that is what drives you. That's your main goal. And that will definitely choke out the fruit of the Spirit in service to working more. And even if some people aren't so much driven by making more and more money, they might still be workaholics. That's where you think, oh, I've got to do this. I've got to finish things. I've got to keep going over and over. And you think that every day too much, and you're driven only by work and the false idol of productivity, because that's what you think will give your life value if you can just produce enough or do enough or be effective enough. But it will be to the detriment of your spiritual health and probably your physical health too. It will stifle your wellness and keep you from growing strong. That's the soil with thorns in it. The last kind is the good soil Jesus mentions. It's deep, healthy, rich with nutrients. It produces a great crop, a big harvest that blesses many others. Jesus says that kind of soil is like people who hear God's message and they get it. They understand it. They also don't settle for shallowness. They want to grow deep, which means they can withstand storms that come. And they keep their priorities in check so that worries don't overwhelm them They keep wellness in mind so that they can always be growing. And by doing so, bless and feed others around them. So those are the different kinds of soil in this parable, the different kinds of souls that Jesus mentions. All of the first three are really prominent these days. There's more and more examples of each of them out there. People who don't let themselves be changed by God's love. People who only maintain a shallow faith that can't handle challenges. And people who are pulled in other directions that they spend all their attention worrying about. It's very common, and all of those ways will stifle our spiritual health, stunt our spiritual growth, and we can all find ourselves with one of those kinds of souls in us from time to time, depending on what happens to us in life. It can happen. So, if you realize that the soil of your soul is getting like one of those types, don't beat yourself up about it. If you notice that your soul is being resistant and bitter, or you feel shallow and weak, or your life is driven by other worries, we've all been there, so just accept God's amazing grace and then start tilling the soil of your soul. Dig deep into it by doing a spiritual and moral inventory of your life. Get in the garden of your soul and tend to it through prayer and reading and meditating and speaking. Ask questions of yourself and of God as you churn up your soul so that it can be rich and healthy and ready to grow. It takes work to make a harvest grow. It takes extra work to make it grow strong and healthy. But the more of that work that you put into yourself, the stronger you will be, the better you will feel, and the more you will bless others by spreading and sowing the seeds of God's love too. Let us pray. Oh God, we confess that there have been many days when our souls have not been that receptive to your love. Days when we have resisted it. Days when we didn't let it sink in very much and were distracted by our own priorities and wants. There have been many times where we have taken your love and blessings for granted and not done the good work in ourselves to grow our faith. We recognize that. We confess that to you today. And we receive and give thanks for your grace that forgives us, that washes over us, that washes us clean of rocks and thorns and waters the soil of our souls so that the seeds of your love may grow. Help us to do that work on ourselves, to churn up the soil that is inside us so that your love may grow in us and we can bless and feed others. Amen.